Let's examine how dates are handled and how you can easily use dates to define what and how you want things to happen in the system. If we look at our posted data in the system, I'm going to go look at my general ledger entries. You will note the posting date field. The posting date field is the most critical date in the system, and the posting date governs exactly when that transaction will show up in your financial statements as far as the period, the year, everything that showed up in. Everything is date based. Every transaction has a date on it throughout the system, and that date governs how data will be combined and rolled up for reporting purposes, year-end purposes, etc. If we take a look at the accounting period setup in the system, the accounting periods are typically defining the start date for each period. So this is a pretty classic example of a June fiscal year. So the first period that we started with at the beginning of time was back in July 2015. That was the July period. You notice that that was the start of a fiscal year. This flag indicates that obviously it's later on in time, and we've actually closed out those fiscal years. And if I scroll down further, you'll notice right here, my current open period in the system is fiscal year 2019, beginning of 7/1/18. So this is just a, if you will, a telescope onto how we would aggregate data for reporting purposes when we do calculations on reports like month to date, year to date, etc. It goes to the accounting periods to figure out, okay, if I said year to date, well, the year began July 1, today happens to be, let's say, November the 15th, and the system will know to go get the data from July 1 through November the 15th when we run a report. So everything is purely transaction based. There's no buckets in the system. When I enter a transaction in the system, so let's go in and do a journal entry. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new line here. And you notice it's filled in the date 3/2/17. Okay, so this is contextual. Let me go ahead and pick a different journal batch where I don't have existing data. And I probably have transactions, all of these. I'm just going to create a new batch, call it dates, set it up. Batches typically you would set up in the system to either organize different types of transactions as you see me doing here, or oftentimes it's a person's batch so you can separate different people's data from each other. And this is a numbering scheme that, again, you can define sequentially on how transactions will show up in that in said batch. Okay, so if we go to our dates batch that we just created, notice that the date filling in now is January 30th, 2020, which happens to be today's date. So one would think that it's just defaulting the current system date, and that is technically correct because that is typically the way most users in the system are going to transact and work. You want the system to assume today's date. If this was, let's say, a transaction that we want to backdate, you could change that date. However, let's say we've closed out our month of December, and I, as a controller, want to continue to work back in the December period. I have the ability to change the work date in settings. Okay, so if I say my work date is 12/31/2019, I'm actually moving my telescope back in time so that the context of when I'm working now is going to be defined based on that work date. So in the end, the work date is just a way to default in for convenience sake what we want to do in the system. And for most users, normally you would just let the system date fill in because the work date does default to the system date, but you can override those dates for the perspective of working back and forwards in time. Uh, Throughout the system, I have shortcuts. I can always pull down the calendar and enter dates, but there's some special shortcuts where I can say T for today, and that will look at the system date, fill it in. That's usually much quicker than typing it in. And we can actually use those in all date fields in the system. So I can enter just T for today or W for work date, and it would automatically pick the corresponding date. So the way I hit my GL is based on the posting date throughout the system. That's fundamental. However, let's say we're doing a purchase invoice. There's many other dates that might come into play when we're doing a document like a purchase invoice. Of course, we'll always have a posting date in the system that is going to describe when I'm going to hit my GL. But let's say this is an invoice that uh, we received and we actually want to post it back a month. We could change that date. However, let's say the vendor's invoice date, their document date from the vendor was 3 months ago, and we just got it late. We could put in a date here that's 3 months back, and this will govern the ability to age that invoice based on the document date. Now, normally these all default to be the same value in most cases, other than the due date, and the due date is calculated based on the payment terms code that we have defined for this vendor. So in this case, uh, we did not have a payments term code, so it defaulted the same. But let's say I had net 30 as a payment terms code. This date would have been defaulted and set as January the 5th of 2020. You as a user can override any of these dates to manage how you want to record the aging point of a document, as well as when you want it to hit GL. But the most important date in the system is the posting date, because that is when it's going to sit in your general ledger entries. And when you run your financial reports, they all use the posting date to decide how to pull things up. We had shown you in another video how an account schedule would work, and I ran a statement of activities example before. I'm going to choose that same example, except this time I'm going to dwell a little bit on my reporting. So when I run my report, uh, these are just ranges of dates. I could run across any date in the system. I can run from January the 15th, uh, 16 through February the 7th of 2016, and the system will pull up and show what happened between those date ranges in the system. Okay, so in this case, obviously, I did not have, okay, so there's some data showing up. There's January 15th, 16th through February the 7th, 16th. Everything is transactional. There's no buckets that say I have to run January or I have to run February or do something mythical like that that older systems force you to do. If I come and drill down on this number now, you'll notice that all my transactions showing up here will be in that date range. So let's go find some accounts where I have some activity going on. There's that 13,000 we saw earlier. If I drill down on that and look at my general ledger entries, they're all within the date range we pulled up. The only other special date in the system is a closing date. So the system posts everything by dates in the system. There is a special date in the system that you'll see when you're doing year-end processing. So if I look at my year-end batch, I ran a closing for June 30th, 2018, and you notice it just prefixes that posting date with a C, and that means it is flagged as a closing date in the system, and we can choose to include or exclude those closing dates when we run our account schedules and reports in the system. So for example, if I'm running an account schedule, let's go back here and have a quick overview. You'll notice I can choose to include or exclude closing entries. Why would that be important? So let's say I'm running a report that goes from uh, June '01 through July 31. 16. Okay. Now, if I just run that in its natural state, uh, at the end of June, on June 30th, we're going to see a massive amount of closing entries for the entire year, meaning that this will result in huge negative numbers. But by clicking this flag, I can have the system ignore those OC 0630 transactions. Hence, I can get cross period reporting that shows me our revenues and expenses that cross that fiscal year boundary. So the way so dates are all transaction based, and again, just as a user, you can just simply run reports, do anything you want, cover any date span, any period span you want to. You could go 10 years, include closing entries, and you would get a true revenue picture across 10 years because there's no buckets in the system. Hopefully, this will clarify that dates are very simple, yet very flexible and powerful in terms of your ability to manage how you want to see your data and how you want to combine and transact across any period, any year, any period of time.